The whiskey-soaked cowboy's lips crashed against hers before Delilah Kensington could even register what was happening, stealing something she had been saving for someone who truly mattered. And in that moment of violation beneath the paper lanterns of the dance hall, she realized that her carefully planned life in Willits, California, had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. The year was 1876, and Delilah had arrived in Willits just 3 months prior with her aunt and uncle, seeking a fresh start after her parents' death from fever back in Missouri. The small lumber town nestled in the coastal mountains of Northern California had seemed like a promising place to rebuild her life. At 22 years old, she had expected to find work, perhaps eventually marry a respectable man, and settle into the quiet dignity of frontier life. She had not expected Thomas Brennan. Thomas was the son of the largest ranch owner in the area, a man with more money than sense and a fondness for whiskey that exceeded both. He had been circling her like a vulture since she had arrived, his intentions clear to everyone but apparently himself, because Delilah had rebuffed his advances at every turn. She worked at the general store, kept her head down, attended church on Sundays, and dreamed of a life that did not include being another prize for a spoiled drunk to claim. The autumn dance had been the social event of the season. The whole town had turned out to the newly built community hall, decorated with colorful paper lanterns imported from San Francisco, and the streamers made by the local ladies' auxiliary. Delilah had worn her best dress, a deep blue cotton with cream lace at the collar that had belonged to her mother. Her dark hair was pinned up carefully, revealing the graceful line of her neck, and her brown eyes sparkled with the rare joy of an evening free from worry. She had been standing near the refreshment table, watching couples whirl across the floor to the lively fiddle music when Thomas had stumbled toward her. His shirt was stained, his eyes glazed with drink, and he reeked of cheap whiskey. She had tried to step away, but he had been faster than she expected, grabbing her arm and yanking her close. His friends had laughed and hooted from across the room as his mouth found hers in a brutal, clumsy kiss that tasted of alcohol and tobacco. Delilah had shoved him away with all her strength, her hand connecting sharply with his face in a slap that echoed through the suddenly silent hall. Thomas had stumbled backward, more from surprise and intoxication than from the force of her blow, and landed hard on his backside. The room had erupted in a mixture of gasps, nervous laughter, and whispers. "You had no right," Delilah had said, her voice shaking with fury and humiliation. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of these people. No right at all. Thomas had scrambled to his feet, his face flushing red with embarrassment and anger. "You should be grateful, you little—" "That's enough." The voice had come from the doorway, deep and commanding, cutting through Thomas's drunken tirade like a knife through butter. Every head in the room had turned to see who had spoken. Delilah had looked as well, her heart still pounding from the violation and confrontation, and found herself staring at a man who seemed to fill the entire doorframe. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that strained against his worn flannel shirt. His arms were thick with muscle, the kind that came from years of hard labor rather than idle exercise. Long, dark hair fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. His eyes were a startling shade of green, and they were fixed on Thomas with an intensity that made even the drunk cowboy take a step back. "Lucas Ashford," someone had whispered near Delilah, "the mountain man from up north." Delilah had heard of him, though she had never seen him before. Lucas Ashford was something of a legend in the area. He lived alone somewhere in the mountains above Willits, coming down only occasionally to trade furs and purchase supplies. Some said he had been a soldier once. Others claimed he had fled civilization after some tragedy. Whatever his history, he was known as a man who kept to himself and did not tolerate fools. "You want to say something, mountain man?" Thomas had slurred, trying to reclaim some of his lost bravado. His friends had shifted uncomfortably behind him, clearly less eager for confrontation now that Lucas had appeared. Lucas had stepped fully into the hall, his movements controlled and deliberate. He was even more imposing up close, all hard muscle and quiet strength. "I'm saying you assaulted that woman, and you're going to apologize." "She's nobody," Thomas had protested, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "Just some girl from Missouri with no family name. I was doing her a favor by paying attention to her." The room had gone completely silent. Delilah had felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but before she could speak, Lucas had closed the distance between himself and Thomas in 3 long strides. He had grabbed the front of Thomas's shirt and lifted him nearly off his feet, holding him there with one hand as easily as if he were a child. Apologize, Lucas had said, his voice deadly calm. Now. Thomas had paled, his earlier bravado evaporating in the face of Lucas's quiet fury. I'm sorry, he had mumbled, not meeting Delilah's eyes. I shouldn't have done that. Lucas had held him a moment longer, then released him with a slight push that sent Thomas stumbling backward into his friends. Get out, Lucas had said, and don't come back until you're sober and have learned some manners. Thomas and his companions had fled, their exit accompanied by a few scattered chuckles from the crowd. The fiddle music had started up again, tentative at first, then growing more confident as the dancers returned to the floor. The incident was over, at least publicly, though Delilah knew the gossip would last for weeks. She had stood there, still trembling, unsure whether to feel grateful or mortified. Lucas had turned to her, his expression softening slightly. Are you all right, miss? Delilah had nodded, not trusting her voice. Up close, she could see the small details her initial assessment had missed. The lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his stern demeanor indicated. The careful way he held himself, as if conscious of his size and strength, the genuine concern in those green eyes. Thank you, she had finally managed. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, Lucas had said simply. No man should treat a woman that way. They had stood there for a long moment, the music and laughter swirling around them, and Delilah had felt something shift inside her chest. This man, this stranger who lived alone in the mountains, had defended her honor when everyone else had simply watched. He had asked for nothing in return, expected no gratitude or reward. He had simply done what he believed was right. Would you like some air? Lucas had asked, gesturing toward the door. You look a bit shaken. Delilah had nodded, grateful for the excuse to escape the stares and whispers. Lucas had offered his arm, and she had taken it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the worn fabric of his shirt. They had walked out into the cool October night, the sounds of the dance fading behind them. The town of Willits was small, little more than a main street with a few cross streets branching off. The buildings were mostly new, rough-hewn lumber and fresh paint, speaking to the recent growth brought by the lumber industry. Beyond the town, the mountains rose dark and imposing against the star-filled sky. It was beautiful in a wild, untamed way that still sometimes took Delilah's breath away. They had walked in silence for a few minutes, following the dirt road away from the community hall. Delilah's breathing had gradually steadied, the trembling in her hands subsiding. She had been acutely aware of Lucas beside her, his presence both comforting and unsettling. I've seen you in town, Lucas had said finally, breaking the silence. At the general store. I work there, Delilah had replied. I've been in Willits since July. From Missouri, Thomas said. She had nodded. My parents died last winter. Fever. My aunt and uncle brought me out here with them. My uncle works at the sawmill. I'm sorry about your parents. The simple sincerity in his voice had brought tears to her eyes again, but this time she had let one or two fall. Thank you. And thank you for what you did back there. That was my first kiss, and it wasn't supposed to be like that. Lucas had stopped walking, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his features had been softer, the hard edges smoothed by shadow. Your first? I know I'm old to have never been kissed, Delilah had said, feeling foolish, but I wanted it to mean something. I wanted it to be my choice with someone I cared about, and he just took it, like I didn't matter at all. You're not old, Lucas had said firmly, and there's no shame in waiting for something that matters. What he did was theft, plain and simple. They had stood there in the middle of the empty road, the distant music from the dance hall drifting on the night breeze. Delilah had found herself studying Lucas's face, trying to understand this quiet, powerful man who had appeared like some avenging angel just when she needed him most. Why did you come to the dance? She had asked. I heard you don't usually come to town functions. Lucas had smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face. I don't, but I was in town for supplies, and I heard the music. I thought I'd stop by, maybe have a cup of that punch they always make. I'm glad I did. So am I, Delilah had said softly. They had walked a bit further, circling back toward the town. Lucas had told her about his life in the mountains, about the cabin he had built with his own hands 5 years ago, about the rhythms of solitary living and the harsh beauty of the wilderness. He spoke with the economy of words common to men who spent most of their time alone, but there was poetry in his descriptions that surprised her. Delilah had shared her own story in turn, her childhood in Missouri, helping her mother with the sewing and her father in his carpentry shop, the devastating loss of both parents within weeks of each other, the difficult decision to leave everything familiar and start over in California, her hopes for the future, modest though they were. When they had finally returned to the community hall, the dance was winding down. Couples were gathering their things, calling out farewells, heading home through the darkness. Lucas had walked Delilah to her aunt and uncle's wagon, where her Aunt Margaret had been waiting with barely concealed curiosity. "Thank you again," Delilah had said, reluctant to let the evening end. "For everything." "It was my pleasure, Miss Kensington," Lucas had replied, his formality at odds with the easy conversation they had just shared. He had tipped his hat to her aunt, then disappeared into the night, leaving Delilah staring after him with a confusion of feelings she could not quite name. The ride home had been filled with her aunt's questions, most of which Delilah had deflected. What could she say? That she felt drawn to a man she had just met? That the stolen kiss from Thomas had left her feeling violated and angry, while a simple walk and conversation with Lucas had made her feel more alive than she had in months? It made no sense, even to her. The days that followed had been difficult. Thomas's father, being a man of wealth and influence, had tried to smooth over the incident. He had come to the general store personally to apologize on his son's behalf and to offer Delilah a sum of money for her distress. She had refused, politely but firmly, which had earned her a reputation for pride that she wore without shame. Thomas himself had kept his distance, though Delilah often felt his eyes on her when they crossed paths in town. She had learned from the other women that this was not the first time he had behaved badly with drink in him, but it was apparently the first time anyone had publicly called him out for it. Some of the women admired her for standing up to him. Others thought she should have accepted the money and moved on. Delilah cared little for either opinion. What she did care about, though she tried not to admit it even to herself, was whether she would see Lucas Ashford again. She did not have to wait long. 3 days after the dance, Lucas had appeared at the general store just before closing time. The shop was empty except for Delilah and Mr. Patterson, the elderly owner, who had been counting the day's receipts in the back room. "Miss Kensington," Lucas had said, removing his hat as he entered. He looked freshly washed, his hair still damp and curling slightly at the ends, his beard trimmed. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," Delilah had replied, her heart suddenly beating faster. "Do you need supplies?" "Actually, I came to see you." Lucas had shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to check that you were all right after the other night, and to ask if you might like to take a walk with me sometime, if that would be appropriate." Delilah had felt a smile spread across her face. "I would like that very much." They had begun walking together regularly after that. Lucas would come down from the mountains every few days, timing his visits to coincide with Delilah's free time. They would walk the roads around Willits, talking about everything and nothing, gradually learning the contours of each other's hearts. Delilah discovered that Lucas had indeed been a soldier, fighting in the closing days of the Civil War when he was barely 18. He had seen things that still haunted him, done things he would not speak of, and when the war ended, he had found he could no longer bear the noise and crowds of civilized life. He had drifted west, working odd jobs until he had found these mountains and decided to stay. "It's peaceful up there," he had told her one afternoon as they sat by the creek that ran through town. "Quiet. The only voices are the wind and the water and the animals. After all the screaming and gunfire, all the death, I needed that quiet." "Do you ever get lonely?" Delilah had asked. Lucas had been silent for a long moment. "I did," he had finally said. "I got used to it, told myself I preferred the solitude. But lately I've been thinking that maybe there are different kinds of peace. Maybe the quiet I've been seeking isn't the same thing as being alone." He had looked at her then, and Delilah had felt that strange flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. She was falling in love with this mountain man, she realized, this gentle, strong, damaged man who had defended her honor and then courted her with a patience and respect that made her want to cry. October turned to November, and their courtship continued. Lucas taught Delilah how to identify animal tracks, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to move quietly through the forest. Delilah shared her love of books with him, reading aloud from the volumes she borrowed from the town's small library, watching his face as he listened to poetry and stories. They had not kissed. Lucas seemed determined to give Delilah time, to let her heal from the violation of that first stolen kiss. He was respectful to the point of almost being distant physically, though his eyes held a warmth that spoke of deeper feelings. It was Delilah who finally broke the unspoken barrier between them. It was late November, and Lucas had taken her on a longer walk than usual, up into the foothills where the view opened up to show the valley below. The autumn colors were fading, the trees preparing for winter, and the air held the crisp promise of cold weather to come. They had been sitting on a fallen log, watching the sun set over the mountains, when Delilah had turned to Lucas and said, "I want you to kiss me." Lucas had gone very still. "Delilah, I want my second kiss to be given freely," she had continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "To someone I choose, someone I care about, someone who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect." She had reached out to touch his face, her fingers brushing the edge of his beard. "I choose you, Lucas." Lucas had searched her eyes, looking for any hesitation or doubt. Finding none, he had leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. When his lips finally met hers, it was nothing like the brutal assault from Thomas. This was gentle, reverent, a question asked and answered. His hands had come up to cup her face with a tenderness that made her ache, and when they finally broke apart, Delilah had felt tears on her cheeks. "That's what it should be like," she had whispered. "Always," Lucas had replied, his forehead resting against hers. "For you, always." Their relationship had deepened after that. They kissed often now, though Lucas remained careful to observe propriety. He was courting her properly, as he put it, which meant asking her uncle's permission to see her, attending church with her family on Sundays, making his intentions clear to the entire town. Not everyone approved. The Brennan family, still smarting from the humiliation of the dance incident, spread rumors that Lucas was not suitable, that he was half wild and dangerous. Some of the town's more proper citizens agreed, suggesting that Delilah should set her sights on someone more civilized, more settled. Delilah ignored them all. She had learned something important that night at the dance, that respectability and good manners had nothing to do with wealth or social standing. Thomas Brennan, for all his family's money and influence, had been willing to violate her for his own amusement. Lucas Ashford, for all his rough edges and mountain ways, treated her like something precious and rare. December brought snow to the mountains, and Lucas's visits became less frequent as the weather made travel more difficult. Delilah found herself counting the days between his appearances, living for the moments when she would see his tall figure striding into town, always coming first to the general store to see her. On one such visit, just a week before Christmas, Lucas had asked her to come up to his cabin. "I know it's not proper for you to be alone with me there," he had said quickly, seeing her aunt's expression. "But I'd like you to see where I live, how I live, and I promise I'll have you back before dark." Her uncle had agreed, though her aunt had been less certain. Delilah had bundled up in her warmest clothes and followed Lucas up the mountain trail on the horse he had brought for her. The journey had taken several hours, winding through forests thick with pine and fir, crossing streams that ran clear and cold, climbing higher and higher until Willits was just a scatter of buildings far below. Lucas's cabin had been more than Delilah had expected. It was solidly built, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, it was tidy and surprisingly comfortable. Lucas had made most of the furniture himself, and while it was simple, it was well crafted and sturdy. Furs covered the wooden floor and bed, and shelves held supplies, tools, and a surprising number of books. "You read," Delilah had said, examining the collection. "I told you the mountains were quiet," Lucas had replied with a smile. "Books help fill the silence, though lately I find myself thinking less about the stories in them and more about someone I'd rather spend my time with." He had made them lunch over the fire, venison stew with vegetables he had stored in his root cellar, and they had talked about the future, about dreams and possibilities, about what kind of life they might build together if Delilah was willing to consider a life that included these mountains. "I know it's not what you're used to," Lucas had said, his expression serious. "It's isolated up here, especially in winter. The work is hard and there are dangers, but I would do everything in my power to keep you safe and happy. I would build you whatever you needed, give you whatever I could. I know I'm just a mountain man with little to offer, but these rough hands and a heart that belongs entirely to you. But if you'll have me, Delilah, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of your trust." Delilah had felt tears spring to her eyes. "You proved that the night we met," she had said, "when you stood up for me when no one else would, when you made sure my second kiss was given freely instead of stolen. You've been proving it every day since, with your patience and your kindness and your respect. I don't need you to prove anything more." "Is that a yes?" Lucas had asked, hope lighting his eyes. That's a yes," Delilah had confirmed, laughing through her tears as Lucas had swept her into his arms and spun her around the cabin. They had been married in January of 1877, in a simple ceremony at the Willits church with her aunt and uncle and a handful of friends in attendance. Thomas Brennan had not been there, having left town shortly after Christmas under circumstances that involved a gambling debt and his father's furious disappointment. Delilah had spared him barely a thought. Her attention had been entirely focused on Lucas, who had worn a new suit and looked uncomfortable but determined as he spoke his vows. The first months of marriage had been an adjustment. Living in the mountains was indeed harder than town life, though Delilah found she did not mind the isolation as much as she had feared. Lucas was patient as she learned the skills necessary for mountain living, how to preserve food, how to tend a larger garden, how to help with the trap lines, how to shoot a rifle well enough to defend herself, or hunt if needed. What surprised Delilah most was how much she thrived in this new life. Away from the gossip and judgment of town, away from the expectations and limitations of civilized society, she found a freedom she had never known before. She could wear practical clothing, speak her mind, work alongside her husband as a true partner. Lucas valued her opinions, asked her advice, shared every aspect of his life with her. And at night, when the fire burned low and the mountain winds howled outside, Lucas would hold her close and remind her that she was cherished, protected, loved beyond measure. Their physical relationship had deepened with the same tenderness that had characterized their courtship, and Delilah had discovered that true intimacy was about so much more than the act itself. It was about trust and vulnerability, about being seen and accepted completely. Spring came, melting the snow and bringing new life to the mountains. Delilah planted a garden near the cabin, expanding on the small plot Lucas had maintained for his own use. She also began making improvements to the cabin itself, sewing curtains for the windows, making cushions for the chairs, adding small touches of beauty and comfort that transformed the space from a bachelor's shelter into a true home. Lucas noticed and appreciated every change. "You've brought light into this cabin," he told her one evening as they sat together watching the sunset. "Into my life. I spent so many years thinking I needed to be alone, that I was too damaged by the war to be around people. But you've shown me that I was wrong. I wasn't damaged beyond repair. I just needed someone patient enough to see past the scars." "Everyone has scars," Delilah had replied, lacing her fingers through his. "Yours are just more visible than some. But you're the strongest, kindest man I've ever known, Lucas Ashford, and I'm grateful every day that you walked into that dance hall when you did." They still went into Willits regularly, though less often than before. Lucas would trade his furs and purchase supplies, and Delilah would visit her aunt and uncle and catch up on the town news. The general consensus seemed to be that Delilah had made an unconventional but happy choice. Even those who had initially disapproved had to admit that Lucas treated her well and that she seemed genuinely content. Summer brought heat and the hard work of maintaining their homestead. Lucas taught Delilah how to smoke meat, how to identify which plants were edible and which were dangerous, how to read the signs that told of approaching weather changes. They worked together to expand the cabin, adding a second room that would eventually serve as a bedroom for the children they both hoped to have. It was in August that Delilah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but it was not until Dr. Morrison from Willits confirmed it during one of their town visits that she allowed herself to believe it was true. She had told Lucas that evening, back at the cabin, watching his face transform from surprise to joy to awe. "A baby," he had said wonderingly, placing his large hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Delilah had asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Lucas had replied, pulling her close. "Terrified, grateful, amazed. A baby, Delilah. A new life, a new beginning. Everything I thought I'd lost when I came back from the war, all the normal joys I thought I'd never have. You've given me all of that." The pregnancy had progressed smoothly. Though Delilah found the physical changes challenging in the mountain environment, Lucas had been attentive to the point of being overprotective, insisting she rest more, taking on tasks she had previously helped with, worrying constantly about her health and safety. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Delilah had finally told him one afternoon in October, after he had refused to let her carry water from the creek. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I'm going to be fine." "I know," Lucas had said, looking sheepish. "I just can't help worrying. You're the most important thing in my life. And now there's this baby who's equally important. And the thought of anything happening to either of you makes me feel like I can't breathe." Delilah had softened at his honesty. "Nothing is going to happen," she had assured him. "We'll be careful, but we'll also live our lives. This baby is going to be born into a home full of love, with a father who would move mountains to protect it. That's more than most children get." As winter approached again, they made preparations for the birth. Dr. Morrison had agreed to come up to the cabin when the time came, and Delilah's aunt had promised to be there as well. They stocked extra supplies, gathered more firewood than usual, and did everything they could to ensure they would be ready whenever the baby decided to arrive. Delilah's labor began on a cold February night in 1878, 2 weeks before the doctor had predicted. The pains had started gradually, and at first, Delilah had thought they were just more of the false contractions she had been experiencing for weeks. But as they grew stronger and more regular, she had known this was the real thing. Lucas had immediately ridden down to Willits through the snow to fetch the doctor and Delilah's aunt, leaving her with strict instructions to rest and do nothing strenuous. By the time they had returned, several hours later, Delilah's labor was well advanced. The birth had been long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Lucas had stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, offering words of encouragement even when his own face was pale with worry. Dr. Morrison and Aunt Margaret had worked efficiently, and finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, the baby had arrived. "It's a boy," Dr. Morrison had announced, holding up the squalling infant. "A healthy baby boy." Lucas had looked at his son with an expression of such pure wonder that Delilah had started crying all over again, this time from joy rather than pain. When the doctor had cleaned and wrapped the baby and placed him in her arms, she had marveled at the tiny, perfect features, the small fists waving in the air, the loud voice that suggested their son would not be shy about making his needs known. "What should we name him?" Lucas had asked, gently touching the baby's cheek. "I was thinking James," Delilah had said. "James Lucas Ashford, James for my father, Lucas for his." "James Lucas Ashford," Lucas had repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son. I promise you're going to have a good life here." And he had. James grew from a loud infant into a curious toddler, exploring every inch of the cabin and the surrounding area under his parents' watchful eyes. He had his father's green eyes and his mother's dark hair, and a personality that was all his own, fearless, affectionate, and endlessly energetic. Delilah had adjusted to motherhood with the same determination she had brought to mountain living. It was not easy, particularly in the isolated environment of the cabin, but Lucas was a devoted father who shared every aspect of child rearing. He carved toys for James, taught him the names of animals and plants, carried him on his shoulders during walks through the forest. When James was 2 years old, Delilah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Rose Margaret after Delilah's mother and aunt, arrived in the spring of 1880. She was quieter than her brother had been, with Lucas's strong features and Delilah's brown eyes, and from the beginning she seemed content to simply observe the world around her. The cabin had been expanded again to accommodate their growing family, and Lucas had built furniture specifically for the children, small chairs, a cradle that rocked smoothly, a toy chest to hold the increasing collection of carved animals and wooden blocks. The home was filled with laughter and noise and life, so different from the silent refuge it had been when Lucas lived there alone. Delilah sometimes thought back to that night at the dance, to the stolen kiss that had seemed like such a disaster at the time. If Thomas had not assaulted her, if Lucas had not walked in at exactly that moment, would they have ever met? Would she have found this life, this love, this profound contentment? She shared these thoughts with Lucas one evening as they sat on the porch, watching James and Rose play in the yard. James was 5 now, Rose 3, and both children were happy and healthy despite the challenges of mountain living. "I think we would have found each other somehow," Lucas said, his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have happened differently, but I believe some things are meant to be. You were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours." "That's very romantic for a mountain man," Delilah teased, leaning into his warmth. "I'm a mountain man who loves his wife," Lucas replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You taught me that being strong doesn't mean being alone, that opening your heart doesn't make you weak. Everything good in my life now, everything that matters, comes from you." "We saved each other," Delilah said softly. "You gave me back my agency when Thomas tried to take it away. You showed me that a kiss should be freely given, that love should be based on respect and choice, and I gave you a reason to come back down from the mountain, to let people in again." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun set behind the mountains. This was the life Delilah had never dared dream of. A husband who cherished her, children who thrived, a home built on love and mutual respect. It was hard sometimes, isolated and demanding, but it was also beautiful and fulfilling in ways she had never imagined. The years continued to pass, marked by the changing seasons and the growth of their children. James grew tall and strong like his father, learning to hunt and trap and read the wilderness. Rose proved to have her mother's love of learning, devouring every book they could get from town and asking endless questions about the world beyond their mountains. In 1883, when James was 8 and Rose was 6, Delilah gave birth to their third child, another son they named Samuel. He was a quiet baby who grew into a thoughtful child, more introspective than his siblings, but no less loved. Lucas built more additions to the cabin, expanding it into a proper house with separate rooms for each child and even a small library for Delilah's growing collection of books. They had become more integrated into the Willits community over the years, though they still lived primarily in the mountains. Lucas's reputation had shifted from that strange mountain man to Lucas Ashford, the reliable hunter and trapper who helped out during the bad winter of '82. Delilah was known as a woman of strength and principle, someone who had chosen her own path and made it work. The Brennan family had largely faded from prominence after Thomas's continued troubles with drink and gambling had drained the family fortune. His father had died in 1881, and Thomas himself had moved to Sacramento, where rumor said he was working as a clerk in a shipping office. Delilah occasionally felt a twinge of pity for him, but mostly she just felt grateful that his moment of drunken entitlement had led to her meeting Lucas. By 1885, their family was complete. James was 10, Rose was 8, Samuel was 5, and Delilah was content with 3 children. The house was full of life and love, chaos and laughter. Lucas had become a respected figure in the area, known for his tracking skills and his willingness to help neighbors in need. Delilah had started teaching the local children during the winter months when families could spare them from farm work, using their home as a small schoolhouse. On a spring evening in 1886, 10 years after that fateful dance, Delilah and Lucas took a rare moment alone together. The children were staying with Delilah's aunt and uncle in town for a few days, giving their parents a chance to reconnect without the constant demands of parenthood. They had walked to the same spot where Lucas had first taken her, the overlook where she had asked him for her second kiss. The valley spread below them, green with new growth, and the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Do you remember the first time we stood here?" Delilah asked, her hand in Lucas's as it had been so many times over the years. "I remember everything about our early days together," Lucas replied. "The way you looked at the dance, so fierce and brave even though you were shaken. The first time I saw you smile, really smile. Not just the polite expression you gave customers at the store. The day you told me you wanted me to kiss you, that you wanted your second kiss to be given freely." "You made sure of that," Delilah said, reaching up to touch his face. His beard was streaked with gray now, his face lined by weather and time, but his eyes were still the same startling green, still looking at her with the same warmth and love. "You've always made sure I had a choice, that I was your partner, not your property." "Because that's what love is," Lucas said simply. "Choosing each other every day, respecting each other, building something together." He pulled her close, and they kissed as the sun set, just as they had 10 years before. But this kiss was different from that first careful, reverent touch of lips. This kiss contained all the years between, all the challenges overcome and joys shared. It was a kiss of partnership and passion, of deep, abiding love and unshakable commitment. When they finally broke apart, both were smiling. "I would do it all again," Delilah said. "Every moment, every challenge. As long as it led me here, to you, to our life together." "Even that first kiss?" Lucas asked, a hint of old anger in his voice at the memory. "Even that," Delilah confirmed, "because it brought me to you. It showed me the difference between taking and giving, between violation and respect. And it led to my second kiss, the one that mattered, the one that was mine to give." They stood together as darkness fell, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the love they had built. The path from that dance hall to this mountain overlook had not always been easy, but it had been worth every step. The years that followed brought their own joys and sorrows, as life always does. James grew into a young man who combined his father's strength with his mother's intelligence, eventually establishing his own homestead further north in the mountains with a young woman from Willits. Rose became a teacher, taking over Delilah's winter school and expanding it into a year-round endeavor with support from the growing town. Samuel, the quiet one, surprised everyone by showing a talent for drawing and painting, capturing the beauty of the mountains in ways that brought people from as far as San Francisco to commission his work. Lucas and Delilah grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became the couple others looked to as an example of what marriage should be. Equal parts partnership and romance, built on a foundation of respect and sustained by daily choices to love and cherish each other. In the spring of 1896, as they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, their grown children and their families gathered at the mountain house for a celebration. James brought his wife and 2 sons. Rose brought her husband and infant daughter. Samuel brought his new bride, an artist from San Francisco who had been delighted to discover his mountain sanctuary. As Delilah looked around at the gathering, at the faces of those she loved most in the world, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She was 45 years old now, her dark hair streaked with silver, her face lined with the marks of years spent laughing and living. Lucas was 50, his beard fully gray, his powerful body showing the first signs of age. But they were healthy and happy, surrounded by the family they had created and the love they had nurtured. "What are you thinking about?" Lucas asked, coming to stand beside her as their family laughed and talked inside the house. "Everything," Delilah replied, leaning against him. "That night at the dance, the way you defended me. Our first walk, our first real kiss, building this life together, our children and grandchildren. How lucky I am." "We're both lucky," Lucas corrected. "I was dying up here before I met you, even if I didn't know it. Just going through the motions of survival without really living. You gave me back my life, Delilah. You gave me a reason to live instead of just surviving." "We gave each other that," Delilah said. "We saved each other." That night, after their family had departed, Lucas and Delilah sat together on their porch as they had done countless times before. The mountains rose around them, dark and eternal, and the stars blazed overhead in a display of light that never failed to take Delilah's breath away. "Do you ever regret it?" Lucas asked suddenly. "Giving up town life, the comfort and society and ease of living somewhere more civilized?" Delilah laughed. "Not for a single moment. This is where I belong, Lucas. with you, in these mountains, living a life that's real and hard and beautiful. I wouldn't trade it for all the comfort and society in the world. Even though it started with a stolen kiss. Especially because it started that way, Delilah said firmly. Because it taught me the difference. Because it showed me what I deserved, what I should demand. And because it led me to a man who understood that love is about freedom, not possession. That a kiss should be given freely, not taken by force. Lucas pulled her closer, his strong arms encircling her in the embrace she had come to think of as home. I love you, Delilah Ashford. I've loved you from the moment I saw you slap that drunk cowboy and stand up for yourself. I'll love you until the day I die and beyond, if there's anything after. I love you too, Delilah replied, tilting her face up for a kiss. My mountain man, my protector, my partner, my love. Their kiss was soft and sweet, a familiar gesture between two people who knew each other better than they knew themselves. It held all the tenderness of their first real kiss on this mountain, combined with the passion of 20 years of marriage and the deep contentment of a love that had weathered every storm. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Inside the house, they could hear the crackle of the fire Lucas had built earlier, smell the lingering scent of the dinner they had shared. Outside, the night sounds of the mountains surrounded them, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through pines, the distant howl of a coyote. This was their life, built from nothing but hope and hard work and love. It had started with a violation, a stolen kiss that should never have happened, but it had been transformed by Lucas's intervention into something beautiful. He had made sure her second kiss was given freely, and in doing so, he had given her back her power, her agency, her right to choose, and she had chosen him, this quiet, strong mountain man with the gentle heart and the protective soul. She had chosen him every day since, through the challenges and joys, the hard winters and beautiful springs, the tears and laughter. She would keep choosing him, she knew, for whatever years remained to them. As they sat together under the stars, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that dance hall in Willits to this mountain home, from stolen kisses to freely given love, from two broken people seeking healing to a family built on respect and partnership. The drunk cowboy who had stolen her first kiss had thought he was taking something from her. Instead, he had inadvertently led her to the man who would teach her what love truly meant. Thomas Brennan had meant to claim her as a prize. Lucas Ashford had chosen to honor her as a person. That was the difference that mattered, the lesson Delilah had learned and carried with her through all the years since. Love was not about taking, it was about giving, freely and gladly. It was about choice and respect and partnership. It was about seeing another person as your equal and choosing to walk beside them rather than trying to own or control them. Lucas had understood that from the beginning. He had defended her, yes, but he had also given her space to heal and time to choose. He had never presumed or demanded. He had simply offered himself, his heart, his life, and let her decide if she wanted to accept. And oh, how glad she was that she had accepted. This life, this love, this family, it was everything she had never known she wanted. It was hard and beautiful and real in ways that soft civilization could never match. Thank you, she said suddenly, turning to look at Lucas in the starlight. For what? He asked, confused. For seeing me, Delilah said. For defending me when you had no reason to. For making sure my second kiss was mine to give. For being patient while I healed. For loving me enough to let me choose. For building this life with me. For being you. Lucas's eyes grew bright with emotion. Thank you for choosing me, he replied, his voice rough. For seeing past the rough exterior to the man underneath. For giving me a reason to come down from this mountain and rejoin the world. For our children and grandchildren. For 20 years of happiness I never thought I'd have. For being you. They kissed again, long and deep, and then they sat together in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. They did not need words anymore, not after 20 years together. They could communicate in glances and touches, in the language of two souls that had grown so intertwined they were nearly one. As the months and years continued to pass, Lucas and Delilah remained in their mountain home, surrounded by the wild beauty they both loved. Their children visited regularly, bringing grandchildren who ran through the forest and learned the ways of the wilderness just as their parents had. The house rang with laughter during these visits, filled with the noise and chaos of a large, loving family. During the quieter times, when it was just the two of them again, Lucas and Delilah fell back into the rhythms they had established over decades. They worked together, maintaining their homestead, hunted and gathered and preserved food for the winter, read together by the fire in the evenings. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing thoughts and memories, dreams and observations. They also made love with the same tenderness and passion that had characterized their relationship from the beginning. Age had not diminished their desire for each other, only deepened it, adding layers of history and affection to the physical connection they shared. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Lucas and Delilah celebrated their 25th anniversary. They were 50 and 54 respectively, their hair silver, their faces lined, their bodies showing the wear of hard mountain living. But their love was as strong as ever, perhaps stronger, tested by time and proven true. James organized another family gathering, and once again their children and grandchildren filled the mountain house. There were 9 grandchildren now, ranging from babies to teenagers, and watching them run and play gave both Lucas and Delilah profound joy. "We did good," Lucas said, his arm around Delilah as they watched their family. "We did very good," Delilah agreed. 3 strong, kind children who grew into good adults, 9 grandchildren who are healthy and happy, a marriage that has lasted a quarter century and shows no signs of weakening. I'd say we did better than good. That evening, after the celebration had ended and they were alone again, Lucas gave Delilah a gift. It was a necklace, simple but beautiful, made from a piece of polished jade he had found in the mountains years ago, and finally convinced a jeweler in San Francisco to set properly. "It's the color of spring," Lucas said as he fastened it around her neck. "New beginnings, fresh growth, hope. That's what you gave me 25 years ago. That's what you've given me every day since." Delilah touched the smooth stone, feeling the warmth of it against her skin. "It's beautiful, Lucas. Thank you." "Not as beautiful as you," he replied, and though the words were simple, the love in his voice made them profound. They made love that night with the slow tenderness of long practice, knowing each other's bodies as well as they knew their own. Afterward, they lay together in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of their mountain home. "I want to grow old with you," Delilah said softly. "We're already old," Lucas pointed out with a chuckle. "Older then," Delilah corrected. "Ancient. I want to be that couple people talk about, the ones who grew old together in the mountains, who loved each other for 50 years or more." "Then that's what we'll be," Lucas promised, "because I'm not going anywhere without you, and I plan to stick around for a long time yet." And they did. Years continued to pass, bringing changes to both their family and the world around them. The new century brought new technologies and new ways of thinking. The town of Willits grew and modernized. Their children's children grew up in a world different from the one Delilah and Lucas had known. But through it all, Lucas and Delilah remained constants. They were the foundation upon which their family was built, the example their children pointed to when talking about what marriage should be. They had proven that love based on respect and choice could last, could thrive even in difficult circumstances, could grow stronger rather than weaker with time. In 1906, tragedy struck when the Great San Francisco earthquake devastated the city to the south. The disaster affected all of California, and even in their mountain isolation, Lucas and Delilah felt the tremors. Their first thought was for Samuel, who had moved to the city with his wife to pursue his art career. It took 3 agonizing weeks before they received word that Samuel and his family were safe. They had lost their home and much of his work, but they were alive and unhurt. Lucas and Delilah immediately invited them to come stay in the mountains while they rebuilt their lives, and Samuel, his wife, and their 2 children arrived in late May of that year. Having Samuel's family with them for those months was bittersweet. Delilah loved having her youngest son and his family close, watching her grandchildren explore the same mountains their father had roamed as a child. But she also saw the strain on Samuel, the loss of his life's work, the struggle to figure out what came next. It was Lucas who finally sat down with his son and had a long talk. Delilah did not hear what was said, but afterward, Samuel seemed lighter, more hopeful. He began drawing again, capturing scenes from the mountains, and by the time he and his family returned to San Francisco that autumn, he had a new body of work and a renewed sense of purpose. "What did you tell him?" Delilah asked Lucas after Samuel had left. "That loss is part of life," Lucas replied. "That what matters is how you rebuild afterward, that his family survived, which is what's truly important, and everything else can be recreated. That he's stronger than he knows, just like his mother." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. Even after 30 years of marriage, Lucas still had the power to move her with his words and his understanding. As they moved into their 60s, Lucas and Delilah began to slow down. The hard physical labor of mountain living became more challenging, and they had to accept help from their children more often. James and his sons assisted with the heavy work. Rose and her family brought supplies from town more frequently. Samuel sent money from his art sales, insisting they use it to hire help when needed. But they remained in their mountain home, unwilling to leave the place where they had built their life together. They might move slower, work less, rest more, but this was where they belonged, where their roots had grown deep into the rocky soil. In 1910, they celebrated their 35th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them. They were 65 and 69, both showing their age now, but the love between them had not dimmed. If anything, it had deepened, become even more precious as they realized how limited their remaining time together might be. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we met?" Delilah asked as they sat together after dinner. "After Thomas stole my first kiss?" "I said a lot of things that night," Lucas replied with a smile. "You said there was no shame in waiting for something that matters," Delilah reminded him. "That what Thomas did was theft. You gave me back my power in that moment, made me feel like my feelings and choices mattered. That's when I started falling in love with you, I think." "Right then." "I fell in love with you when I saw you slap him," Lucas admitted. "The strength it took to stand up for yourself in front of all those people, to refuse to be cowed by his family's power and money. I thought, now there's a woman worth knowing." "And was I?" Delilah asked with a teasing smile. "Worth knowing?" "You were worth everything," Lucas said seriously. "Worth coming down from my mountain for. Worth opening my heart for. Worth building a life with. You took a broken soldier who had hidden himself away from the world and taught him how to live again. How to love again. You gave me everything that matters." They kissed, as they had thousands of times over the years. And in that kiss was all the history they shared, all the love they had built, all the life they had lived together. The years after that anniversary were harder. Lucas developed a cough that winter that never quite went away. Delilah's joints ached more with each passing season, making it difficult to move around as she once had. They were forced to accept more help, to acknowledge that they could not do everything themselves anymore. But they were together, and that made everything bearable. They still sat on their porch every evening, weather permitted, watching the sun set over the mountains they had called home for so long. They still read together by the fire, though now they sometimes needed James or Rose to read aloud when their eyes grew too tired. They still held each other every night, drawing comfort from the familiar warmth of the other's presence. In the spring of 1915, as wildflowers bloomed across the mountain meadows and new life returned to the forest, Lucas grew weaker. The cough that had plagued him for years had worsened over the winter, and no amount of rest or care seemed to help. Dr. Morrison, now elderly himself, visited from town and confirmed what they had all feared. Lucas's lungs were damaged, possibly from his years of exposure to harsh weather and wood smoke, and there was little that could be done. Their children gathered at the mountain house, bringing their families, not wanting to miss what time remained. Lucas spent his final weeks surrounded by the people he loved most, sharing stories and memories, offering advice and blessings. He made sure each of his children and grandchildren knew how proud he was of them, how much he loved them. But it was Delilah he focused on most. They spent hours together, just the two of them, talking about their life together, about all they had shared and built. Lucas made her promise that she would not give up after he was gone, that she would continue to live fully and find joy where she could. "You gave me 39 years of happiness," Lucas told her one evening, his voice weak but his eyes still bright. 39 years I never thought I'd have. You were my second chance at life, Delilah. You were my everything." "And you were mine," Delilah replied, tears streaming down her face. "You showed me what love should be, what respect looks like. You made sure my second kiss was given freely, and every moment we've shared since has been equally free, equally chosen. I love you, Lucas Ashford. I will always love you." "I know," Lucas said, reaching up to wipe away her tears. "And I'll love you past death and into whatever comes after. Wait for me, though. Don't be in a hurry to follow. Live, Delilah. Live fully for both of us." Lucas Ashford died on a May morning in 1915, surrounded by his family, with Delilah holding his hand. He was 70 years old and had lived a good life, hard but fulfilling, marked by love and purpose. His passing was peaceful, a quiet slipping away that came with the dawn. Delilah felt as though part of her soul had been torn away. She had known this day would come eventually, had tried to prepare herself for it, but nothing could have truly readied her for the reality of losing her partner, her love, her other half. The funeral was held at the Mountain House, with friends and family coming from miles around to pay their respects. Lucas was buried on the mountainside, in a spot he had once pointed out to Delilah as his favorite view, where he could look out over the valley and the forests he had loved so well. After the funeral, James tried to convince Delilah to come live with him or one of her other children, but she refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "This is where Lucas and I built our life together. I'm not leaving it now." So she stayed in the Mountain House, though it felt impossibly empty without Lucas's presence. Her children visited frequently, making sure she was cared for, but Delilah insisted on maintaining as much independence as possible. She was 73 years old, her body worn by decades of hard living, but her spirit was still strong. She spent her days tending the garden Lucas had helped her plant so many years ago, reading the books they had collected together, walking the paths they had traveled side by side. She talked to him sometimes, sharing her thoughts and memories, feeling his presence in the wind through the pines and the call of the birds. Time passed, seasons changed, grandchildren grew into adults and had children of their own. The world continued to turn, bringing new technologies and new wars, new hopes and new heartaches. Through it all, Delilah remained in her mountain home, the keeper of memories, the living testament to a love that had transformed two broken people into something whole. In the summer of 1920, as Delilah approached her 80th birthday, she grew weaker. Her children wanted to take her to a hospital in San Francisco, but she refused. "I want to die here," she told them, "in the home Lucas and I built, near where he rests. Let me go in peace." They honored her wishes, gathering around her in the room she had shared with Lucas for so many years. As the July sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Delilah felt her strength fading. "Tell me about the first time you met Dad," her granddaughter Emma asked, sensing that her grandmother needed to speak, to remember. So Delilah told the story one final time, about the dance and the stolen kiss, about the mountain man who had defended her honor, about walks and conversations and the first real kiss given freely, about a life built on respect and love, about children and grandchildren, about 39 years of joy that had started from a moment of violation transformed by one man's decency. "He made sure my second kiss was given freely," Delilah said, her voice growing faint. "That's what love is: choice, freedom, respect. Everything else flows from that." As the last light faded from the sky, Delilah took a final breath and closed her eyes. She died with a smile on her face, surrounded by the family she and Lucas had created in the home they had built together. They buried her next to Lucas on the mountainside, in matching graves that looked out over the valley. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates, but also an inscription that Rose had chosen: "Love freely given, forever shared." The mountain house remained in the family, passed down through the generations as a reminder of the couple who had built it and the love that had sustained them through nearly 4 decades of marriage. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren continued to visit, to walk the same paths Lucas and Delilah had walked, to sit on the porch and watch the sun set over the mountains. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines, visitors swore they could feel the presence of the couple who had loved so well, whose story had begun with a stolen kiss, but had been redeemed by one that was given freely. Their love had started in violence and violation, but had been transformed by respect and choice into something beautiful and lasting. Lucas and Delilah Ashford had proven that true love was not about possession or power, but about partnership and freedom, that a kiss should be given, not taken. That choice mattered more than circumstance, and that two people, if they chose each other every day, could build a love strong enough to last a lifetime and beyond. Their story became legend in the area, told and retold by successive generations. The drunk cowboy who had stolen a first kiss, thinking to claim what was not his. The mountain man who had defended a stranger's honor and then won her heart by giving her the freedom to choose. The life they had built together, hard but beautiful, marked by love and respect and partnership. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about the difference between taking and giving, between violation and respect. About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead to the best, if we are brave enough to keep going, to keep choosing love over fear, hope over despair. Lucas and Delilah had been brave. They had chosen love. And in doing so, they had created something that outlasted them both, a family built on respect, a legacy of love, and a story that reminded everyone who heard it that true love is always a choice, freely made and freely given. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the stolen first kiss, but the second one given freely. Not the violation, but the healing that came after. Not the broken pieces they had started as, but the beautiful whole they had become together. Their love story had begun in the Wild West of 1876, in a rough lumber town where justice was uncertain and respect was hard won. It had endured through decades of hard living, through challenges and changes, through the joys of raising a family and the sorrows of loss. And it had ended only when death parted them, leaving behind a legacy that continued long after they were gone. Lucas and Delilah Ashford had lived and loved and built something lasting. They had shown that a mountain man and a woman from Missouri could find each other in the wilderness and create a home, a family, a love that was freely given and freely accepted. They had proven that respect and choice were the foundations of true love, and that a kiss given freely was worth infinitely more than one stolen by force. And so, their story lived on, told by their descendants and remembered by all who heard it. A story of the Wild West, of hard times and harder choices, of a drunk cowboy who stole a first kiss and a mountain man who made sure the second was given freely. A story of love that started in violation but was redeemed by respect, that grew from a single act of decency into a lifetime of partnership and joy. It was a story worth telling, worth remembering, worth holding up as an example of what love should be. And it was a story that ended not with sadness, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, and a love that had lasted until the very end and beyond, into whatever lay on the other side of mortality. Lucas and Delilah had found each other in the wilderness. They had chosen each other freely. They had built a life together that honored both of them, and they had loved each other completely, from that first real kiss on the mountainside to their final breaths in the home they had made together. That was their story. That was their legacy. And that was the love that would be remembered long after the Wild West had faded into history, a testament to the power of choice, respect, and love freely given.